we're going to be doing now the lightning talks. We've got 4 panelists, and they're going to be presenting their talks, each of 10 minutes. And after all of them, there's going to be a Q&A session. If you have any questions regarding to the panelists' talks, please put them in the Authoritarian app, and also please specifically say who are you asking the question, so that we know who to address the question to. And so, starting up with our first speaker, Advancing Shrimp Welfare in Europe Through Corporate Campaigns, Lessons and Perspective by Justine Ademar. I'm going to say a quick bio. Justine has worked in animal advocacy for 6 years, covering corporate welfare, institutional work, and campaigns. In 2023, she joined Mercy for Animals as a corporate relations specialist, focusing on global cage-free accountability and shrimp welfare policies. Since October 2024, she has been part of ICA. She lives in the south of France with her 2 special needs cats. Please give a big round of applause to Justine.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. I'm really happy to be here and to have the opportunity to present our work on shrimp welfare. So 10 minutes is really quick, so it's going to be just a little snapshot of what we do, and hopefully you'll have a lot of questions. To begin with, I wanted to say a few words about ICAL. We are an international animal welfare nonprofit that was founded more or less a year ago, a little bit. And our goal is to advance corporate animal welfare by engaging with major food companies, securing meaningful animal welfare commitment, and making sure they are fulfilled. In this session, I will share a lesson learned from running shrimp welfare campaign in Europe, which have led to several corporate commitments from major retailers regarding 2 specific issues: eye sock ablation and pre-slaughter electric stunning. So these commitments will positively impact hundreds of millions of shrimp when fully implemented, and definitely contributed to creating momentum for shrimp welfare in Europe, an issue that was previously been overlooked by both consumers and retailers. So I'm going to present our approach and strategy. The first thing, obviously, is quite traditional. It's corporate engagement. So we'll already start by engaging with companies in negotiation, starting a dialogue, explaining the issue and what we want from them. However, at ICAR, we are at heart a campaigning organization. This will mean that we will increase the pressure on company pretty quickly in order to push them to commit before having to launch a public campaign. So I'm going to take 2 specific examples of our work and our engagement with Waitrose and Co-op in the UK that both committed in February this year. So the first step is obvious. We're starting with negotiations. We're engaging with companies through dialogue or meetings, explaining the issue, why we think they should commit to end eye sock ablation and implement pre-slaughter electric stunning in their supply chain, present them with clear solutions. This means a lot of follow-ups, meeting, and being quite patient on this step. But after some time, if there's no progress or no clear willingness to engage or commit to these asks, we will start escalating. And this means that we will raise concern to leadership, board members, investors, business partners, and in order to voice our concern and push the company to make the commitment, increasing the pressure. So finally, obviously, there is still no commitment. The last step that we can make is start doing some pre-campaign actions. So this is usually some digital action, but it's also basically sending any previews of campaign assets to companies. And that's exactly what we did with Waitrose and Co-op. We did not launch any public campaign, but we did send them previews of websites, campaigning website that we were ready to publish before they commit in order to increase the pressure. So as you can see here, obviously these websites are quite graphic. We are engaging in specific executive targeting. So both persons you can see on this slide are CEOs of the companies. It's kind of, we're using a little bit of gory humor and parody with AI to convey our message. And we also use a specific wording in those websites. So we can think that eye stalk ablation and pre-slaughter electric stunning is super long and a little bit difficult to understand at first. So we'll use words that are very visual and convey exactly what shrimps are going through. We'll say that Waitrose suffocates animal in the absence of a commitment to stun them electrically, or that Co-opt is cutting animals' eyes off when they don't have a specific eye stalk ablation commitment. The idea is to convey empathy, obviously, and to make people react and understand this issue in a very, basic and natural way. These steps were just detrimental with pushing Waitrose and Co-op to commit. After months and sometimes years of engagement with these companies, when we switched to step 2 and 3, there was basically only a week before they decided to publish their commitments. So they did have a willingness to do it, but we absolutely make this process quicker and obviously push them to commit a commitment publicly and really own their decision. Obviously, it's not always the case, and after these 3 steps, if a company still doesn't want to publish their commitment, we would be able to launch a public awareness campaign. So obviously, we're not doing that with all 30 companies we are talking to. We select the targets very carefully. And that's what we did when we decided to launch a campaign against Iceland in the UK. We launched this campaign in May 2025, and it was active from May to early July. The campaign included different campaign tactics that you can see on this slide, including digital action, especially through our platform Raven, executive targeting. You can see here the creator of Iceland, and we also made some specific website for executive. We also included business partners, targeting affiliates, etc. And of course, last but not least, we organized several on-the-ground protests. So you can see a picture of a very successful one that we organized in London that was fully organized by grassroots activists and was very detrimental in having Iceland reach back to us to negotiate again after cutting all dialogue with us. They reached out to us and ended up publishing their commitment early July. In the meantime, we continued engaging with company in a more negotiation side by leveraging this campaign, showing them what we were doing to Iceland, and let's say increasing the pressure on their peers to make them understand what we were capable of doing on the campaign side. And this helped us to secure a second commitment from Morrison in June by leveraging the campaign asset that we were using against other targets. I want to show you a funny example of executive targeting. We made this AI video with the CEO of Iceland, and in this video, he's undergoing everything that shrimp goes through on farm, and then when they are obviously slaughtered, and including having him remove his own eye stalk. So we thought that was very powerful in conveying the message and also quite funny. So this is the kind of tools that we will use in order to highlight their responsibility in what's going on in their own supply chain. This campaign was successful in strategy to getting some media attention around the subject of shrimp welfare in the UK and also in specialized news outlets. We also use the media coverage to obviously create momentum around shrimp welfare, but also call out other retailers that were not committed yet. So when celebrating a win, we'll always include a little sentence calling out Aldi, Lidl, or Asda that were not yet committed. So we're able to leverage also this media attention to convince other retailers to commit. Yeah, and then, so in total in 2025, 4 retailers committed to ending eye circumambulation and implementing pre-slaughter electric standing in their supply chain. And in total, we now have 9 retailers in Europe that are publicly committed. Most of them, you can see, are in the UK, with the exception of Albert Heijn in the Netherlands. Also want to take this opportunity to thank any organization that is also working on shrimp welfare for their work on this issue. And to wrap things up, our main takeaway on this successful campaign are the importance of framing the campaign, especially with different framing with companies, consumers, and media. Building momentum on one campaign to pressure other retailers and other targets at the same time. And the main reason we believe this tactic was successful is because we have an ask that is pretty easy to implement for retailers, that we presented with clear solution on the negotiation phase, and we are also able to put strong pressure on those targets if they're unwilling to, let's say, make a rational commitment without any pressure. What's next for us in shrimp welfare? We're publishing a shrimp ranking report in October to report on the work that has been done by more than 30 retailers in 6 European countries. And this report will also lead to our next shrimp campaign. As you saw, shrimp welfare is gaining momentum in Europe, but so far the work was mostly focused on the UK. And we have decided to extend our campaign work to other European countries. And it will start by the very first shrimp welfare protest in Berlin on October 4th. So you're all invited to join us. And this will launch our next campaign in Europe, hopefully getting more wins for shrimp. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justine. Love the gory horror, gory pictures. Really, really appreciate it. The second talk, Surviving the Authoritarian Shift by Martin Smrek, who is the founder and executive director of Humánny pokrok, which he grew from a small vegan food festival in 2009 into Slovakia's leading animal advocacy group. Under his leadership, the organization secured a ban on fur farming and commitments from most of the retail market to end cage eggs and live carp sales. Outside work, he once brewed beer at home, broke 11 bones in a single sports accident, and now juggles 3 sports for life. Please give a big round of applause to Martin.
Thank you. I should probably reconsider my bio for the future. Okay. So, the authoritarian conservatives and far right are taking over all over the place. And this is very bad news for the animals. And as a person fighting for the animals in a country that is undergoing democratic backsliding, my first idea was to share with you how to prepare your organizations for the authoritarian repressions. But looking around how the world is developing, it is pretty obvious that this is not going to be solvable on an organizational level. And it is something that we need to approach as a movement. That's why I decided to start a discussion about what can we do, what should we do, and how should we do it as a movement in the future. But I would start with the conservative part of this story. We are a radically progressive movement. Our job is to expand moral circles and expand it so far that they would cover not only different groups of people, but also different groups of animals, especially farmed animals. And this makes us one of the most progressive movements out there because no one is asking that much from other people. Authoritarian conservatives, on the other hand, are the reactionary force. They are trying to undo social progress. They want to shrink the moral circles and push different groups of people out of there, like LGBTI people or women or people of color. They want to concentrate the power back in the hands of the few men in the government, the church, the military, and businesses, like factory farms. And usually there are a lot of things standing in the way of them succeeding in this. But recently, authoritarians started seizing power, winning elections all over the place and leading polls in other countries. And this is already shaping the political environment both in the United States and in the EU. And there's a lot of things going on, but I'm trying to boil it down to a few crucial things that we need to think about. First of all, the moral circles are shrinking. And this is a change, because for decades we worked in an environment where they were expanding. And on top of that expansion, we were adding farmed animals for people to consider. But right now, even the contested areas like trans people rights are being aggressively attacked, and even the past victories that we took for granted are now being questioned. And that changes the game significantly. Media space is being flooded in the meanwhile, and this is the newest addition to the authoritarian playbook. The idea is to flood the media space with a mix of actual policy proposals and completely unhinged ideas, like your prime minister trying to pull your country out of the European Union, casually quoting Adolf Hitler and shaking hands with war criminals. And media are having a hard time to figure out which is actual policy and which is just a smokescreen. So they tend to cover everything, but that significantly reduces their capacity to cover anything else, like your new campaign or investigation footage. Facts don't matter anymore in this game. Truth is the enemy of all authoritarians, so they want to get it out of the way as soon as possible. So they dilute it with lies, they try to remove and silence experts and scientists, and undermine or take over control over universities and media. Which is another challenge for a movement that is proudly so grounded in science and in being actually right, in an environment where it doesn't matter anymore in policy. Companies are now afraid, but not of us and our campaigns. We are great at pushing them to do the right thing, but no one can beat governments in this game. They can tax them, they can fine them, and they can regulate them into oblivion. They can even threat their leadership with prison. Rules don't matter anymore. Authoritarians don't believe they are tied by the law, so most of the cases they try to push public outside of policy making, and they rule by executive orders or various emergency measures instead. And they use it not only to implement new dangerous pieces of legislation, but also to remove the protections of the past, both for people and for animals. And finally, they systematically try to suppress public participation because they don't want to share the power. And in order to do that, they take away your right to protest, your right to organize, your access to public information, your freedom of speech, and eventually change the election laws to get you out of the game completely. And this changes a lot of things that influence how we can operate as a movement. First of all, public is overwhelmed in this situation. And let me remind you that we generally mobilize the same small part of the population that every other advocacy group or movement mobilizes, regardless of whether this is about animal rights, human rights, environment, governments, and democracy. And these people are used to live in a world that is going forwards, where the moral circles are expanding, and when we are asking just a bit more to include the farmed animals in that. But now the tide has turned, and instead of being concerned about expansion, they are concerned about basic human rights of their friends, family, and fellow citizens, and defending foundations of democracy and democratic establishment from the authoritarian attacks. And it seems quite out of touch to ask them to consider expanding moral circles for animals when the basics are being attacked right now. And this has significantly negative impact on our chances to actually run effective public campaigns that could mobilize masses. Companies give up in this game, and governments are actively and heavily pressuring them to give up their corporate commitments. We've seen this in the United States when right after the elections, many corporations dropped their climate goals immediately, and also their diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments without actually putting up any fight. And this is already having consequences in Europe as well. Those same companies stopped funding pride marches in Germany, and many had to be cancelled or had significantly reduced funding. And in Slovakia, the government directly and openly tried to declare corporate commitments to protect hens and fishes illegal. And this is a serious development because this seriously undermines one of the most effective tools we have for securing victories for the animals. At the same time, legislation is being killed in the process. In the best case scenario, it's not moving anywhere. In the worst, it's being killed. In the European Union right now, conservatives and the far right are trying to cripple and kill the Green New Deal, including the animal welfare legislation revision we fought so hard to get on the table. At the same time, the European Commission is playing with authoritarian moves, and recently they killed the anti-greenwashing legislation in the middle of the legislative process. And in the United States, the EATS Act is trying to take away the rights of states to regulate animal welfare through regulating animal products, essentially trying to kill the Proposition 12 Josh was talking about that morning. This actually means that we are not only losing victories of the past, but we are being actively excluded from the process. And finally, NGOs are no longer seen as partners in this process, but as the enemies. And especially if you are good at mobilizing and if you are good at securing funding for that kind of work, you will very quickly become a prime target for the authoritarian governments. And this will be the case for many groups in our movement. And you can expect everything from smear campaigns through limitations put on your operations and funding, being branded as foreign agent or domestic terrorist, and finally threatened by jail time or dissolution. And this is significantly changing everything, because it challenges how we operate as organizations, how we organize, how we gain victories for the animals, how we translate these victories to policy and legislation, and what are our chances to actually survive as a movement. Because we are not only being excluded from the policy-making process, but we are being actively targeted by authoritarian governments. And this changes everything. And for long, we as a movement had the luxury to focus exclusively on farmed animals. And we've taken the democratic establishment we needed to operate for granted. But the game is changing, and so must we. And what I am suggesting is that we need to approach taking care of the democratic establishment the same way we approach our movement building and fundraising efforts. It's something we desperately need to be effectively able to fight for the animals. And unless we prepare for this, we're not going to survive. And this is going to require us to become active parts of the civil society and making sure that it will not only survive, but thrive. And that means publicly defending democratic institutions when they are under attack, standing up and speaking up for different social groups, social movements, and other organizations when they are being attacked, regardless of whether they care for animals or not. And it also means publicly calling out and confronting politicians who are harming both animals, but also people and the principles of democratic establishment. Because this is no business as usual. This is a crisis in making. And if we face this crisis without being prepared, we're going to be washed away very quickly. So what I'm saying is that we need to start preparing, and we need to start doing it now. Otherwise, we risk losing everything in the process. And that's why I'm going to follow up on this session with the next session, which is going to be a meetup about strategic response to authoritarian rising, which is going to take place in the Golden Room. And we're going to talk about what can we do and what should we do as individuals, as organizations, and as a movement in order to slow down, stop, and reverse the rise of authoritarianism so we can thrive and actually continue winning for the animals. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much. We're moving on to our third talk, which is called Targeting Financial Institutions to Stop Factory Farming by Dirk Verdonk. Dirk is a director of World Animal Protection Netherlands, chair of the Dutch Animal Coalition and Dutch Fair Finance Guide, and a board member of Eurogroup. He earned a PhD at Utrecht University, studying the history of vegetarianism in the Netherlands, and has since published books on animal rights and veganism. His latest book, The Exploded Chicken, explores the global history of the meat chicken. Dirk.
Thank you. All those books are just available in Dutch, so sorry about that. Thanks a lot. So my presentation is starts with the reality that money talks, that the world is to a large extent steered where money has power. And that's the case for animals, of course, and the case for factory farming, because all these cruel animal factories are financed directly or indirectly by banks, by big investors like pension funds and insurers, asset managers. And if we want to change the world for animals, that means that the financial sector needs to change. And this is a basic idea that struck me quite a while ago, and that has never left me since. And I actually did a presentation on a care conference 7 years ago in Prague in 2018. And since then, you know, we did a lot of stuff about the financial sector. So I thought it might be a good idea to share some insights and some snapshots about that work today. It's an entry point to pressure the industry. It's an entry point to ensure that companies make the right decisions, that certain factory farms are not built, that certain alternatives get access to money. But it's also a complicated and multifaceted field. But financial institutions do hold a lot of power. They make certain finance decisions. If they are investors, they can divest from companies. They can engage with companies. They can vote on shareholder meetings. This morning we learned that they can call the CEO of McDonald's and put animal-friendly people in the board of a company. So they hold significant power. And one might ask, why would they yield that power? And there could be different reasons. In very rare instances, it could be because it's the right thing to do. And so the example that Josh mentioned about Carl Icahn, because he's a very motivated animal lover in a very powerful position, is an example that sometimes can trigger change. In general, banks are not very known for moral behavior, so that argument is probably not working very effectively with banks. However, pension funds, for example, are not commercial institutions. They are there for the public good. So actually, they might be persuaded by arguments of doing the right thing, as do perhaps development banks, because they are institutions that, you know, are there also to advance the public good. Same with reputational risks. That might be a driver for some institutions to change, especially if staff gets uncomfortable and they need to attract good staff. And, you know, if your staff is not happy with the course of the company, that might be a reason for a company to, you know, tweak their policies a bit. When I started, I thought a very convincing argument would be stranded assets. If you are financing new battery cages and demand changes or legislation comes in place that outlaws these battery cages, you are stuck with useless assets. That's not good risk management, and financial institutions are all about risk management. So I thought that would be a very compelling argument. Since then, I learned that's not really the case, because banks typically get away with it. So they don't carry the burden of these stranded assets, but that burden is carried by the larger society. I have a very typical example from my home country, the Netherlands. At the moment, livestock farmers are bought out by the governments, and billions are spent to buy out farmers. And in essence, that is bailing out the banks, because all these farmers are heavily indebted. So all that public money actually goes to the banks that are not carrying the risks of their irresponsible behavior by, you know, supplying finance to these livestock farmers all these years. Lastly, they can be persuaded by either, you know, the commitments they make, or by certain policies and regulations. An example that is not so compelling anymore, but that used to be compelling a year ago, was that banks have pledged to, be in line with the Paris Agreement, and there is a whole net zero banking alliance of banks committing to the Paris Agreement. Since Trump, you see the banks leaving that commitment, but maybe in the future that becomes compelling again, because I don't see that financing factory farming could ever be Paris aligned, and there's other legislation thinkable that will steer the behavior of financial institutions as well. Right. Then I'd like to share some snapshots of work we have been involved with in the past few years. Let me start with development banks, because development banks are an interesting beast. Because again, they don't have a commercial purpose, they have a public interest purpose. And they are regulated in such a way that there is parliamentarian overview. So you have a democratic angle to steer their behavior. And although the money, in terms of the relative money that they put into the world is not that big, it is important because they typically finance projects that commercial banks think are too risky. And historically, development banks have played a large role in the development of factory farming. To give two examples, in Brazil, the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES, has been critical in Brazil's meat industry, and especially critical in the steep rise of JBS, which is currently the largest meat company on the planet. But also closer to home in Ukraine, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development was key in developing the Ukrainian poultry sector, and especially the company MHP. And not just the European Bank, but also like national state export credit insurance played a very critical role to build up the poultry industry in Ukraine. So I think it's a very good inroad in terms of influencing finance, and we are part of the Stop Financing Factory coalition. And I only have 2 minutes, so I speed up. So I'm moving to a second snapshot, which is about JBS. So the largest meat company, they tried to be listed at the New York Stock Exchange, and they succeeded, unfortunately. We did a lot of stuff together with other organizations, Humane World, Mighty Earth, Greenpeace, to prevent them from being listed, which offers them huge advantages. And we came very close. So at the shareholders meeting, in extraordinary shareholders meeting, I think it was last May, they got the yes, but it was narrow. So I think if we had joined together, we actually could have stopped this in hindsight. And again, this tells you something about the power of the financial sector and our ability to influence it. Last example I'd like to give is I'm in a sort of personal struggle with Rabobank, which is a big Dutch agricultural bank. And I discovered that they are actually part of powerful lobby groups that work against animal welfare and climate change regulation. So, for example, they are part of the National Pork Producers Council in the US, which went to the Supreme Court to block Proposition 12. And a Dutch bank that professes to, think that animal welfare is very important and has a huge policy trying to show that, is actually part of a lobby effort to undermine that legislation. So I think exposing these discrepancies between what financial institutions promise and what they actually do can be another lever for engaging. So it offers a whole range of opportunities and different points of leverage. There's also risks involved, of course, in this type of work. For example, the opportunity costs. It's a lot of work and it's complicated stuff. And that means that all these resources you cannot direct to, I don't know, supermarket campaigns, for example. So that is a tough choice. It requires like a skill set and an expertise that not many of us have in the movement. So it takes time to acquire that. And unfortunately, still at this point in time, I think we have problems to, counter the business case for business as usual. So especially for banks, I think it's still very profitable to be financing those businesses, and we really struggle to change that narrative with good solid economic facts to change that perception. So that's what I wanted to share with you today, and hopefully we can discuss this in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Asymmetries, AI and Animal Advocacy by Kevin Xia, Managing Director at Hive, a global community for farmed animal advocates, effective altruism and animal advocacy community builder, and amateur philosopher. Please give it to Kevin.
Thank you. Martin earlier said that this is not business as usual. This is a crisis in the making. So I hope you're up for another one. AI development is happening fast. Now, I will not talk a lot about the details, because firstly, I have nowhere near enough expertise to do so confidently, and I would hate to pretend like I did. But also, I think it's a common misconception that you need to have deep technical understanding of AI in order to engage with AI and animal advocacy. So I'm hoping to counteract that a bit. What you do need to understand is just how fast AI is developing. We have predictions or forecasts of when we will develop the first AGI systems. These are AI systems that are capable of doing most or all intelligence-related tasks that humans can do. Think of all the work that you can do remotely, for example. And these forecasts seem to be getting shorter and shorter. At this point, several experts predict that we will develop these systems in the next 2 to 5 years. Some of the more historically conservative people who thought that it wouldn't be possible within the first half of the century now think that we are a mere decade away. Either way, we don't have a ton of time, because we also understand that AGI systems could be hugely transformative for society as a whole, and by extension to animal welfare and animal advocacy efforts. For those of you who were around for the Industrial Revolution, probably not quite as many, you will find that the world is becoming unrecognizable. We may see a change at a similar scale, but in a much shorter timeline. The AI community likes to talk of a century's worth of development in a decade, the world in 2125 in merely 10 years. If you believe we can end factory farming by 2125, this could be good news, but things currently don't look quite as rosy. So while there are unique opportunities that this drastic change presents, there are also significant risks. Factory farming could increase to a scale that we previously didn't think possible, in a time that we previously didn't think possible. Either way, I believe these massive stakes, perhaps the highest stakes that our movement has ever faced, require deep investigation, at the very least to learn that there's nothing much that we can do, unfortunately, but ideally to navigate this transition to a society that is good for all animals. So how will we go about exploring this? One, I believe, pattern that I often see as we go on to explore how AI could benefit animal advocacy efforts is what I've called the symmetry problem. We tend to forget that we're not the only ones using AI. In many ways in which AI could help our efforts, the industry could use AI in the exact same way, effectively mirroring these advantages. For example, on product costs, AI could help us reduce the price of, say, cultivated fish to make them market ready. But AI will also benefit the industry and enable them to farm fish significantly cheaper than they currently can. And we may find ourselves in a situation in which both cultivated fish and farmed fish are just much cheaper than they currently are. And we're not exactly sure how this will play out in terms of consumer behavior quite yet. Another example is marketing. AI could help us develop hyper-individualized and targeted outreach campaigns to a massive audience. This is something that we usually have to choose between. However, it could also enable the industry to develop hyper-individualized and targeted marketing and advertisement campaigns for animal products to a massive audience as well. And then lastly, from a bit of a more meta perspective, AI could help us research effective ways to pursue animal advocacy, identify particularly promising targets and particularly promising asks. But it could also help the industry to research effective ways to defend against animal advocacy, and I guess you get the gist. All of that there's to say is, as we explore how AI could affect animal advocacy, it is important to keep the other side in mind. I want to be clear. I think these symmetric interventions are very important. The only situation that's worse than one where cultivated fish and farmed fish are both at a similar price level is one where only farmed fish is much cheaper and cultivated fish is not even on the market. However, I believe to fully leverage the opportunities that AI development can pose to us, we need to work with asymmetries. These are comparative advantages that we have over the industry that give rise to opportunities that the industry can't mirror. You can think of AI as something like an accelerator, an optimizer, or an exasperator. Tiny comparative advantages that we currently have could be used with the right intervention and idea to drastically scale into massive impact if used right. So in the article that I wrote about on this topic, I list a couple of examples. Always happy to brainstorm more, but here are 4 that I think are particularly illustrative. The efficiency asymmetry. Quite plausibly, alternative proteins are simply more efficient conversion systems than animal farming is. From a pure energy in, energy out perspective, alternative proteins should be the better product. So if we can get enough initial demand and momentum and consumer appetite going, then they may simply beat out conventional animal products on the market. And corporations may switch over just for their own sake. The ceiling asymmetry is a bit of a meta one. Now, quite plausibly, the animal industry is already capable of paying for the best marketers, the best lobbyists, the best company leaders. We are less so. This also means that if AI systems remain similarly equitable as they are today, JBS and us really have access to the same ChatGPT models, this could level the playing field to a significant degree, which compared to our current situation is a massive advantage. The agility asymmetry, as you may know, factory farming is deeply entrenched in societal structures and political systems and in massive physical infrastructure, which usually comes at their advantage. I believe in a time of massive upheaval, this may be a blocker. You could imagine a situation where the only way to make animal products cheaper is to take the human out of the supply chain. Now, that will be very difficult to do overnight and will require massive social preparations and political discussion. The same may not be true for using AI systems in protein research. And then lastly, the cooperation asymmetry. Ultimately, the industry is in a competitive market dynamic. We don't have to be. We could at least in principle be in a collaborative dynamic. I gestured to a couple of ways in which this could benefit us around race to the bottom dynamics and industry-wide AI adoption. I think this deserves a bit more exploration, but I think it's an interesting state of the matter that could give space to an interesting intervention to pursue, and happy to brainstorm more about these. All of this talk on asymmetries aside, I would like to offer an alternative frame to the entire discussion. I think we often talk about our battles as if we were pro-animal and the industry is anti-animal. And I think this is slightly inaccurate. We are definitely pro-animal, at least those of us who are not undercover spies. But not necessarily sure if the industry is anti-animal. I think it's a bit more accurate to claim that the industry is pro-money, pro-influence, pro-power, or if you believe them, pro-workers, pro-feeding the world, pro-health, whether they're right or not. But this is important because if we're not in a pro versus anti-animal dynamic, at least in principle, we should be able to find convergent goals. A good example here is probably making an economic case to switching away from factory farming. And AI could help us identify and pursue these convergent goals, leading to a situation where we don't have to battle on the fronts of asymmetry, so to speak. Because to be quite honest, the industry has a lot of asymmetries on their side as well that I didn't cover here because, upbeat and everything. So this is perhaps one worth exploring as well. If you found this interesting, I prepared a little QR code here. You can join various conversations and communities to learn more about the intersection of AI and animal advocacy. You can stay up on relevant resources and read up on them. If you do work in animal advocacy, which I believe most of you do, I strongly recommend to integrate AI into your work as much as you can, as ICAO is doing, and to stay on top of AI development as much as useful to you. I believe that this situation is among the highest stakes situations we've ever faced, but it's massively uncertain, and we're still trying to figure out how to make the most out of it. Doing these will, at the very least, make you slightly more productive in your work, but ideally position our movement as a whole in a much better space when we learn more about how to best navigate this high stake and high uncertainty scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thanks to all of our speakers for these fast-paced lightning talks. We're gonna move as fast to our lightning-paced Q&A session. The first question to Justine. How might you address the following considerations? Since eye stalk ablation is done only on breeding females, it affects relatively few shrimp. The level of suffering is unclear, and because it increases fertility, it could also reduce the number of shrimp overall.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so it's true that eye stalk... Is it working? Okay. Sorry. It's true that eye stalk ablation doesn't concern, or only concern a few number of shrimp compared to other issues like electric stunning or obviously, harvesting and other things. However, on the scientific side, more recently it was assessed that there is a consensus now that eye stalk ablation is unnecessary. It was used to increase productivity, but the industry found other ways to do that now. Eye stalk ablation is mostly done because it was done in the past, so it's more like a routine and something that the industry has always done. So that's also why we are asking companies to commit to ending eye stalk ablation. It doesn't change anything on the side of the industry in terms of productivity. It will nevertheless reduce the suffering of a small number of shrimp. And the second part of the answer is that that's also why we are focusing on asking companies to commit to both standard eye stalk ablation and pre-slaughter electric stunning. On an impact point of view, we want to achieve the highest impact and impacting positively the highest number of shrimp. That's also why we ask companies to not only commit to end eye stalk ablation, but also implement pre-slaughter electric stunning that effectively, impact all the shrimp that are produced. That's also a way that we can manage to get this high impact. And also on the campaigning side, eye stalk ablation is awful. When you look at the footage, it's very difficult to watch, so it's also easy for people to get involved in this campaign and to really understand why it's important to implement better standard for shrimp. And on the company side, it allows us to open the door to something actually effective for shrimp as electric stunning, which is the next frontier for shrimp welfare, while also having this impact on just wiping out a practice that is outdated, cruel, and in the end, really useless.
Okay, thanks. I've got another question. This is also to you from me about the graphicity of your materials. I understand and I know, believe me, how few people are fans of gore and stuff like that. So how do you think that maybe using such violent and very vivid images or videos could possibly affect, like maybe alienate some people because they are not fans of seeing such explicit things? Or can it actually be like being a little bit more comic vibe? Can you gain you more supporters, or maybe possible some of them will be a little bit repulsed?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think in general, so You're talking about the AI things, right? Yeah. Okay. So I think so far, I think like Gustav is here, so to answer a question after that. But on the company side, at least, we haven't had like I think the reaction were more of like, oh my God, like I don't want to be portrayed like this. I don't want to be campaigned against. And I usually think that probably we're really crazy and kind of, weird. But it's also been positive in the sense that they really don't want to be campaigned against. On the side of people, I think obviously when you get to a certain we're going full on this kind of gory kind of. I find it funny. Obviously, some people probably don't. So, I think it's also a personal choice. But so far, I think it's worked. Also because it's kind of new. This is something that we haven't seen. So it's also interesting. And if you go and see those campaign websites that are amazing and that my colleague Adam made, it's really also telling this whole storytelling about greediness of these companies, and so we're making them look like a kind of ridiculous cartoon characters, which they kind of are. If you take a step back, when you look at these big corporations that are literally billion-dollar company, and we're asking them to take the most minimum welfare standards for these animals, and they gain a lot of money from exploiting them, and they're still refusing. So I think showing how ridicule they are in making those absurd decision is also gaining some support from people, and they are able to understand the message above from the gory aspect of it in the first place.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to Martin. What would your response be to people who argue that we need to be a single issue movement to not distract from our core mission, and so that we can gain support and donors from across the political spectrum? That's not me, by the way. I agree with you, said the person.
I would not approach this as another issue that we will be trying to tackle. I would take it like a maintenance work, the same way we approach fundraising, the same way we approach movement building. We're essentially taking care of our ability to have impact, because if we lose that, we won't get anywhere. We're not getting any major conservative funding in the future. We are not going to gain anything from authoritarian regimes. We are only going to lose. So unless we take care of this, which is actually something that organizations do in countries, unless they have the opportunity not to care about it. So this is something that we probably should have been doing all along, but there wasn't such need for that. So yeah, not approaching it as a new issue on our table, but something we simply need to do in the same way we do operations and everything else in our organizations.
Okay, thanks. An interesting take. Martin, what do you think about trying to include conservatives, who might be authoritarians in disguise, as you alluded, in our movement and reaching out stronger to them?
I'm not saying that we should not work with conservatives. We should stop attempts to build authoritarian regimes, but we still need to build wide coalitions with conservatives. And there are a lot of people among even the more radical groups of conservatives that are, in a sense, quite progressives in their thinking. And those are the very few ones that are actually responsive to our messages. So we still need to be able to build wide coalitions. We still need to frame our narratives to resonate among conservatives. But that doesn't mean we need to accept authoritarian regimes and attacks from people who want to dismantle the democratic order. So those are two different things to consider, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Dirk, should we not target to cut subsidies for factory farming? Wouldn't this increase the financial risks for financial institutions?
Yeah, I like that question. Thanks. Of course, we should tackle that, but that's indeed another area that deserves our attention, directed at government stakeholders. Obviously, like in the EU, the Common Agricultural Policy; in the US, the Farm Bill. I do think there is a sort of interface here as well, in the sense that those processes are heavily lobbied by, in terms of the big agricultural companies, which are clients of the financial institutions. So there might be, in terms of responsible lobby, there might be something to be exploited there as well in the engagement with the financial institutions themselves. But primarily, I would think that is a process directed to governments or the European Commission in the case of Europe. And that will indeed affect the profitability of industrial animal agriculture. So yeah, that is an important route also to take.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question to you. How do you, in practice, approach these financial institutions? How do you find the right contacts people?
That's very practical indeed. Well, LinkedIn is very, very useful in that respect. I mean, all these financial institutions, they will have ESG, sustainability people that are there to be contacted. And yeah, it's when you send a letter to the CEO or the board, you get a reply, it's usually not from them. So there you have your contact.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. What other types of asymmetries in AI and animal advocacy are there?
Great question. I would like to think that there are endless, but and when I last looked into this, I found two more that I then ended up scratching out of the talk. One is the motivational asymmetry. I believe that ultimately we care more about reducing animal suffering than the industry cares about causing animal suffering, or consumers care about purchasing animal products that involve animal suffering. I think this is kind of evident in the idea of convergent goals there. To a significant degree, I believe the industry doesn't really care about causing animal suffering because they don't care about animals. The other one is the truth asymmetry. I believe fundamentally we are more right in many meaningful ways. I believe we are more right in describing how animals are actually being treated on farms. I believe we are often more morally aligned with how consumers want animals to be treated on farms. If you are a moral objectivist, I believe we are more right, morally speaking, full stop. This could play out in a way where this is getting a bit sci-fi now, but if you have two maximally persuasive AI agents in front of some sort of systematic judge, you can argue that the position that is simply more right is likely to be more persuasive. I'm not 100% sure if that's true. I'm not sure if truth counts for much, but if it does, I believe that this is one that stands on our sides.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to all the speakers. Once again, a big round of applause.